do multitask and listen to some of the points that I've made. So I'm going to move on and tell you a little bit about ONC. From a Canadian perspective, we're a lot like Canada Health Infoway in terms of that agency's role and relationship with the Canadian ecosystem. With respect to the United States, we were originally created via an executive order under President Bush in 2004. I started here in 2005, so seen quite a bit of change and transition over the past several years. Now in my third administration. We do, as I mentioned, sit in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the really foremost important milestone for our office was that we were codified in law as part of the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act in 2009, and so that really set forth a number of specific authorities, as we say, in law that my office is charged to take on, and we're now kind of set in the U.S. Code as a formal executive branch agency. So again, just to add a little bit more to what I do at ONC in general, per the Recovery Act, which I'm also going to refer to as the High-Tech Act, it's a portion of that, my office got charged with creating the ONC Health IT Certification Program. You may be familiar with the phrase meaningful use, as it was established as part of the Electronic Health Record Incentive Program under the Recovery Act as well. So these are the stimulus monies that were provided to doctors and hospitals to adopt what are called certified electronic health record technology. In order for those products to be certified, my office was charged by Congress to run a certification program. And so that program is focused on different EHR functionalities as well as interoperability requirements, and I can talk to those in a little bit more detail in the future. We also conceptually model our work under what we call the ONC Tech Lab. And so that focuses on these four areas, as you see on the slide. We work with industry and oftentimes fund either grants or through contracts different types of pilot and prototype activity to get a better assessment of how technology can be implemented, if there's a particular design pattern that we're looking to get more experience in, or we want to fund particular efforts to advance industry understanding. We often look to doing pilots or to recruit partners to match up and do pilots to make some difference from an interoperability perspective. The next area relates to standards coordination. And so, we work with the alphabet soup of different standards development organizations, HL7 obviously being one that I'm sure is name brand to many of you, IHE. In America, when it comes to prescription-related information, there's another one called NCPDP. And then, many other organizations from a terminology perspective as well, for Regan Street for LOINC, SNOMED CT, and various other organizations from a standards coordination perspective. So when it comes to the different use cases or contexts in which we're looking for interoperability to take place, we work with those different organizations in a collaborative means to express either HHS priorities or to find ways that we can mutually advance some of the organizations and US interests in interoperability. The third area relates to testing and utilities. So in a lot of cases, as you all well may know, when you're developing code, you're developing software systems, you really need something to test with. And oftentimes, the specs get written, the servers get built, and clients get built, and there's really not a good way to do testing from a conformance perspective with some type of authoritative slant to it. So often, and this is in conjunction with our Health IT certification program, we've developed conformance testing tools. We work with our colleagues at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, also in the US, to work on how to best test particular standards that we require as part of certification. But we also make investments as a general industry benefit to improve the testing and conformance assessment associated with health IT products. And then the last area that we focus on is around innovation. And I'm going to cover a few of those things as they relate to FHIR. But generally speaking, we're always on the lookout to figure out how to bring a little bit of the future to the present. And we collaborate with various cutting-edge programs, other organizations throughout from an American perspective. The next one I'm going to skip over in the middle. It's just for your reference. It defines how ambulatory healthcare providers get paid and has really changed the paradigm for those ambulatory doctors. And then the last one, which is more recent, is called the 21st Century Cures Act. So this was passed at the end of the Obama administration with large bipartisan support. and for the first time in about 8 years had a significant component related to health information technology. And so what it did was first it expanded our certification program. So for those of you today, the status quo is our certification criteria apply to the technology, the software. And we have very few requirements that apply to the business practices of the health IT developer. We have some transparency requirements that I like to call the batteries not included provisions. You know, largely it's about what can the product do, does the software meet the standards, and then it gets its certification. Going forward, Congress said that's no longer sufficient. We want you to establish certain business practices that are going to apply to the corporation, the organization as a whole, from a health IT developer perspective. And so there are a number of new conditions of certification, as they're called, that focus on a wide spectrum of business practices, to say it in short. Some of them relate to publishing open APIs, and the catchphrase there in the statute is without special effort. And the special effort is exerted by those that are going to be interacting with the APIs. So we have to develop technology policy for how to advance this legal requirement and ensure that health IT developers are making available APIs that can be used without special effort. Another area that we have to focus on is what's called real-world testing. So as part of the certification program as it stands today, we have you know, tested products. They go through the testing paradigm, they go through the certification requirements, which is a qualitative assessment of all those results, and then the product gets certified and can be put out onto market. At that point in time, a developer could have, you know, many customers, and it could be an upgrade to their existing product, or, you know, they could be a new entrant to the market, and at that point in time, they really don't have something to test. So one of the steps that Congress asked us to take was to establish parameters for what's called real-world testing. And that's another thing that you can expect to see in the future as we go through what will be regulatory work to establish some of these policy parameters. The other phrase that you may be familiar with if you watch any of the health IT space in America is something called information blocking. And that is a kind of wide-ranging term that's used to describe withholding or restricting the flow of health information from being exchanged. And so Congress put in specific penalties that could apply to health IT developers, health information exchange organizations, health information networks, as it relates to their participation in these types of activities. And so there are particular fines that can be established through our work going forward. And there's an office in the Department of Health and Human Services that will be the enforcer for this. They're called the Office of the Inspector General. They do a lot of the department's enforcement activities, and they're the ones that will be the out there policing information blocking related activities. But again, for your awareness, and as it may relate, especially for those of you that may do business in America, it's something to keep in mind, and regulatory work that you'll see going forward into the future. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ONC's focus very briefly. It's this 2x3 matrix. So we have 3 audiences, the first being the patient, of course, the second being providers, and then the third really being the marketplace, and in that respect, having a competitive marketplace. We look at it across 2 horizontals for these 3 verticals. The first is around interoperability and how we enable interoperability for all 3 of these categories. The second being usability, and really what we mean when we have usability reference here is usefulness. How do we make health IT useful to these 3 categories? How do we make it useful to patients? I think you've seen some activities by the department recently about a renewed interest in empowering patients to get access to their health information. We have a second category on providers. There's a lot of burden reduction activities right now. You find with the introduction of electronic health record systems, there's a lot of benefits in terms of not being on paper anymore, but then it becomes a central focal point for building a lot of the requirements in for healthcare providers, and then their EHR becomes something that they loathe as opposed to making their lives easier. So there's a very strong interest in finding ways to help electronic health record technology and other health IT systems to increase efficiency as opposed to increasing the burdens that providers face. And then, last again, from a usefulness perspective, we want to ensure market competition. We want to enable new ways for data to be accessed and for more players to get into the market and add innovative services. So hopefully this doesn't turn out to be a little bit of an eye chart, but I'm going to cover a few different areas in terms of ONC's strategy related to FHIR. And the one word or hyphenated word I can use to describe it is multimodal. We are approaching how we invest in FHIR, how we approach working with industry across a number of different ways. We currently have established a cooperative agreement, which is a type of grant with Health Level 7 directly. And so we can provide finances to HL7 to then disperse to hire specific experts to work on priorities that are of, let's say, U.S. interest. And so we have that ongoing relationship with HL7. We are also acutely working on areas for FHIR 4's release. There's an area that we're working on which is around the ability to use FHIR and its design pattern to do what's called bulk data exports. So we have an interest here to make sure that not only can you do GET requests for a single patient, but that you can orchestrate a request for a certain population of patients, whether they are patients that belong to a particular health plan or in U.S. government interest, if they are a Medicare beneficiary. We want to enable more efficient ways to use the underlying infrastructure that FHIR has in this restful way to make those types of requests. And so there's a lot of folks, probably some of you in the room, that have been working on this effort to expand the scale at which we can deploy FHIR and access data. We also participate in a number of other industry-related efforts. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Argonaut project. We've provided support and interest along those lines and participated in those activities. There's another organization focused on consumer access, which is called the Karen Alliance, and I provided hyperlinks there if you'd like to check out those organizations. There are many others that I could have occupied this slide with, but I just wanted to call your attention to those two. One other thing that we do, which is in the innovation area of our work, is around prize competitions. Several years ago, Congress passed a law called the America Competes Act, which gives federal agencies the ability to do prize competitions. Some of our sister agencies like NASA, you may be more familiar with from a science perspective, and they're obviously sexy competitions compared to some health IT interoperability ones. But the work that we do is really around pushing the envelope in particular areas, and we've had several that have focused on FHIR. I included a link there so you can get access to many of the other challenges that we worked on if you're interested in checking them out. And there's some that are underway right now. The last two that we work on, first again is around pilots and prototyping. So as we have the opportunity and resources available, we look to work with industry stakeholders and find new ways to focus on the deployment of FHIR. And then the last, as I mentioned earlier, we are starting to make investments in conformance testing infrastructure, again working with industry stakeholders. Many of you are probably designing smart on FHIR apps, or you're developing FHIR clients. Maybe you're working on CDS hook stuff. At some point in time, you want to test that out and make sure that your implementation is matching somebody else's going on there, especially if you're a server oriented company. You want to make sure that your server is going to be conformant with the app expectations in terms of how they're going to interact with you. So we're looking at early stage in investing in some of these conformance testing resources, but those again will be broadly available to industry and hopefully will advance the implementation consistency that exists. So in terms of lessons learned and current perspectives, FHIR will solve all our problems. And then you can obviously see the not really parentheses there. Your colleague Lloyd, who's probably out there, did a little bit of this presentation earlier this week, so he and I are trading places in the virtual presentation style. Made the similar point, and I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that the hype associated with FHIR doesn't go too far ahead of where we can actually respond to industry interests. As is common with interoperability related activities, the standards work and the use case that you're designing your implementations need to be fit for purpose. And so there are things that FHIR is very well suited for, and there are things that current implementations, dare I say, HL7 version 2, as well as the CCDA, will continue to remain the standard of choice. But there are a lot of new opportunities, and what's really made FHIR transformational and been transformative has been that it's really about the data and the ease of access. And as we look to version 2 and CCDA, it had and has been a lot of transactional and document-oriented information exchange, and FHIR really kind of changed that paradigm. So that's where we see the disruption and the transformative aspect in terms of where FHIR's potential is. There's still a lot of specification work to be done. With a US realm perspective, we're working on ways to represent the data that would be of priority to healthcare providers exchanging in the United States. This comes from the consumer perspective in terms of when we give consumers access to their health information. You probably have seen the recent Apple announcement that they have a health record app that is using FHIR as its connectivity protocol to get data from hospital organizations in the US setting. And that's really the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we see going forward in the future. Our national coordinator, Dr. Don Rucker, is always talking about how we can get data on people's smartphones and really enable an app economy in the health IT ecosystem. The other thing that I'd note from a lessons learned or current perspective is there's still a lot of broader infrastructure needs. Once we have a number of FHIR servers deployed across the United States, this is full nationwide scale, we got to find easy ways to find endpoints and to locate where that information is. And so there's ongoing work by people that are far smarter than I in terms of how to really stitch together the national infrastructure. We don't have a unique ID in America from a healthcare perspective, so there's other sorts of things that we talk about related to patient matching and ways in which we can reconcile patient data across different healthcare ecosystems. The one other thing is, the app ecosystem for all of you guys that are working on novel ideas is moving really fast, and we need feedback in terms of what's breaking. This could be from a policy perspective. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the HIPAA privacy and security rules in America. There are areas where that guidance or the rules didn't envision the environment that we're in 2018. And so it's a good feedback loop to make sure that you're giving us information about what issues you're confronting, what you might need from a policy perspective. Equally, from a technology perspective, we're looking at again, areas where more technical guidance could be necessary, more testing could be available, things of that nature. So again, a real opportunity for feedback, and especially if there are advancements that you're making in the Canadian ecosystem, it would be great for you to give us that feedback as well. Last, the kind of setting the technology policy, as I like to hyphenate that word, around APIs is a complex and evolving landscape. As you can imagine, many of you know, Google Maps is an easy API example. For some limited uses, it's free. But when you start to commercialize and use the map services, then there are different fee structures. There are ways in which you have to deal with, typical network overload, denial of service attacks, the privacy and security aspects. And so there's a lot of other dimensions to just deploying FHIR that we're also keeping our eyes on. And again, communications with stakeholders is important. As a federal agency, a lot of the work that we do is, an opportunity like this to spread the message, let people know what we're working on and how to engage with us, and equally making sure that everyone knows kind of where the trajectory is for the work that we're going and where our policy priorities are. So I'm pretty sure this is my last slide. In terms of ways to engage and collaborate, HL7 is obviously one of those places to be. We do a lot of work there, either through subject matter experts that we have a contractual relationship with. Myself and some of my staff do attend those when they are most of the time in North America. And there's an opportunity for us to collaborate at those or other meetings. Equally, IHE or other events that we can collaborate on would be a great opportunity to find me or someone on my staff. If there's ways that we can share solutions that focus on empowering consumers and reducing provider burden, we are all about hearing more information from those of you. I know that the Canadian and American health systems are a little bit different, especially in the way in which we kind of pay for care and the like. But we do have lots of similarities, and I think there are certainly opportunities for us to collaborate on and share. We do participate in several international activities, and so that's another way for those of you that are on the what I'd call the international circuit for us to continue to share and collaborate. And then there are two other places that I wanted to call to your attention as resources that my office has made available, and that's probably the part of the bio that got cut off. One is called the Interoperability Standards Advisory, and the colloquial way I used to describe this is the Standardsopedia. So if you go to this link, you can go to it and navigate it. We break up standards from an American perspective by what's called the interoperability need. And so, what do you need interoperability? What are you trying to accomplish? And so we represent standards along the traditional stack, vocabulary and terminology standards, the content and structure standards, the transport standards, those that would be design patterns for overall services. And so it's really started to be built out into a wealth a reference, be it as it may, for implementers, innovators, other government agencies to, as I like to refer to it, as your first look resource for what's going on from a health IT standards perspective. And you're welcome to check that out. If you do happen to be a particular expert in one of those standards, even if you're not usually in the US market, we would certainly welcome your feedback, and you can make comments on each of those individual sections. So I would encourage you to check it out, and you can certainly let me know if you have any questions, and I can refer you to the right staff person on my team if you do have any specifics. The last is something that we call the interoperability proving ground. And so hopefully you have a lot of time to network. I'm sure I'm between you and your next caffeine break at the session today. But one of the opportunities that we noted a couple years ago is that we would attend HIMSS, or we would attend an HL7 session or an event like this, and I'd interact with someone that would explain something awesome that was going on in the health IT space. And had I not run into that person, I would have never known that they were working on this cool project. And so what we wanted to do was find a way for people to collaborate in an asynchronous, lightweight way, via the internet, via usual means, and kind of a social type of environment. And so we created the Interoperability Proving Ground, which is a place where you can share, learn, and be inspired by projects that are going on mostly through the US, but we do have a burgeoning international bit of entrance. And you get a geocoded map entry, so you can check out the world map and see where projects are. The cool thing about it is you get to tag your projects, and that allows us to notify you via subscription mechanism. So if you want to find out what FHIR projects are going on, and I'll use the US as an example, you can search by the FHIR tag, and that will dynamically sort the projects entered into the Interoperability Proving Ground that are working on FHIR. And equally, if you happen to be in the US and you're working in a particular state, you can do a filter by the particular state that you might be interested in. So I'm originally from New York. If I wanted to see what projects were going on in New York, I would be able to click on that tag, and as a New Yorker, I'd be able to see what other projects are going on. Ultimately, we hope this helps stimulate connections and other engagement among the peers that are working on FHIR-related projects that would have maybe never happened had it not been for this platform and these other kind of organic ways that we collaborate via these particular sessions. So with that said, I feel like I'm pretty much at time. Happy to answer your questions, which I wanted to leave time for, and very much appreciate, again, the opportunity to present to you today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. So, folks, if you could come to the mic. Yep, Tilla's reminding me which mic to speak into. And Laura, excellent, thank you. And Steve, I'll replay the question for you in case it doesn't come over so well.
Okay.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Laura Bright. I've been really heavily involved in IHE and HL7 for about 14 years now. Over the last couple of years, I've been working with the DHHS Office of Population Affairs and recently with the Sequoia project. And I was wondering if you would comment on the announcement yesterday from CMS about the shift from meaningful use to the Promoting Interoperability project and what that might mean for the marketplace and how it intersects with the work you've been talking about today.
Okay. Steve, did that come through on the mic, or do you need me to repeat it?
And I'm probably going to need you to repeat them.
Okay. So wondering if you can comment on the announcement that came out yesterday from CMS on the shift from meaningful use
to the Promoting Interoperability
Interoperability Directive?
Focus. Project, whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so that is a proposed rule, and as has been in the law that I mentioned earlier, the MACRA Act, which is that middle law I mentioned. First, that one is applicable to ambulatory providers, and that started the change. That program started the changing of the kind of terminology that we used to originally refer to meaningful use. That on the ambulatory side is now referred to as the Quality Payment Program, and that has a subsequent acronym associated with MIPS. Which is the program that ambulatory providers participate in. As my colleagues at CMS were looking at the way in which hospitals participate with the various payment programs, again, under the new administration, it was an opportunity for us to rebrand and really refocus the program requirements. And so there's a new scoring paradigm that has been proposed, also a name change to really refocus and prioritize the efforts that our policy interests are aligned with, which is promoting interoperability.
Excellent, thank you. Other questions? No, all right, then okay, Attila, and then I'm going to go after Attila.
Okay.
Thank you for this, Steve. Very nice presentation. It is giving us an insight into what US does, and even us that actually participate at HR7 International are still surprised by some of the things you said, so that's pretty cool. You may not have heard any of this. So for Gavin, could you please ask Steve, how close is the relationship between the Argonaut project and their involvement, and whether or not it has immediate plans on the US core baseline?
Okay, so Steve, first there was lots of compliments and platitudes, and then that was followed up with a question on, can you comment on the work that's gone on with the Argonauts and their profiling? And then also, I assume, Attila, you were getting at some of the differences of US core? Not difference? Pardon me? Future. And the future of US core, given that there might be some divergence?
Sure, and so this is always a good test for like how people translate your question, right? Listening comprehension. So with respect to the Argonaut project, that has been a success by many means. We've obviously seen a good many of the health IT developers that have gone through the ONC Health IT certification program get certified using and following the Argonaut profiles. The one thing that I neglected to include in my slide, but you're certainly welcome to find it on healthit.gov, which is our website, is something called the Certified Health IT Product List. That, as products go through the certification process, that is the single source of truth for all the certified product listings. As part of what's called our 2015 edition certification, we require that health IT developers disclose certain information about the API technology that they've gotten certified, and it also includes the technical documentation associated with that. We have a shortcut button, and so the URL for that is chpl.healthit.gov. It's CHAPL is our shorthand for the acronym there. If you go to that website, there's a shortcut button about API 2015 edition and the APIs. That gives you direct access to the data that gets reported to us about how 2015 edition products have been certified. And we've been going through that data and looking at what the health IT developers have represented, and many of them have chosen to deploy the Argonaut profiles. So, as in terms of the work, bearing fruit in terms of implementation and deployment, that's been, one good sign. The thing that I would note is, as many of you are aware, the Argonaut profiles to date and the data query implementation guide that they've produced is based on FHIR DS2.2. That evolution from a standards perspective is what got converted into the US FHIR core profiles, which are the STU3 branded profiles. And the next evolution and really the future trajectory that we're looking at from a FHIR perspective is some of the new bulk data related capabilities built into the FHIR spec for release 4, as well as an evolution of the Argonaut profiles based on the US core release 3 profiles. So I think everything's going to, at least as far as we're working collaboratively through HL7 and with industry, our interest would be to refresh the Argonaut related work as a release 4 set of profiles, more comprehensive suite, perhaps more data availability via those profiles. They were originally created based on what's called the Common Clinical Data Set, which is a subset of data that we initially set in our policy requirements. But stakeholders have indicated certainly need more data for different use cases and the like. So that's going to be a forward-looking trajectory over the next, say, 18 to 24 months.
Excellent, Steve. Thank you. A lot of the earlier sessions as well with our presenters from, say, Norway, Germany, or even our own discussions about work going on in Ontario, we've talked a lot about the challenges of the different versions, right? So people who have made bets on, a particular version of FHIR in its evolution. So, I mean, do you have any advice? We haven't established effectively national FHIR profiles yet. We haven't baked them into certifications yet or RFPs. you know, it's a moving market, but at the same time, lots of people don't want to wait. So, you know, sitting in your role with perhaps maybe the world's largest market, any advice for Canada here?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because this is one of those things that if you had asked me what keeps me up at night, you know, versioning is certainly one of those. And I know for those of you that work on the specifications, it's equally, you know, one of the bigger challenges that we face as well. Just to give you a sense, again, of timing in terms of how you could call it the lag or the latency between policy interest and technology deployment. In fall of 2015, we published our 2015 edition certification criteria. At that time, we didn't require specifically a particular, you know, standard for the API certification criteria that we have. So their functional demonstration criteria was up to health IT developers to choose the particular type of FHIR, you know, standard that they wanted to use. Many have chosen FHIR, as I mentioned. Some have chosen, you know, proprietary related implementations. But for those that used Argonaut, again, the DSTU2 versions, those products have just gone into the wild, being deployed in 2018 and ramping up for the 2019, which is a compliance year for healthcare providers to have that technology. Another, I would say, dynamic in the marketplace was, at least for this initial release of the Apple Health Records app, they are using the Argonaut profiles as their focal means for support. So even anecdotes from certain companies that I've talked to over time, even though they started to look and deploy and have some features that may be FHIR Release 3, they've gone back and made sure that they've buttoned up their DSTU2 implementation so that if their clients are poised to interact with iPhone customers, which is probably most of us in the United States at some point, that they're going to be able to respond with that data and make the app access accessible. I think as we look to the kind of US market, there are some health IT developers that are using FHIR Release 3, and there are certain resources and profiles in Release 3 that just aren't in Release 2. So we can kind of understand there's a little bit of that staggering in terms of how the standard has been developed, its iterative cycle over usual 18-month cadence. And I think Release 4 is the next big step that we at least really see as we're looking into the crystal ball, because there are a number of FHIR resources that are up for normative status, as it is referred to in HL7, as well as the maturation of several that have been through implementation now and deployment at scale. So really, leading up to 2019, we see a jump and a probably preparation to move to FHIR Release 4 as that spec gets released and more people have an opportunity. So I would say like 2019, 2020 would really be the FHIR Release 4 time period, at least for people to start to build out their alpha and beta products. But for the time being, if you're going to go commercial right now, DSTU2 really seems to be your best bet. Although I would, with my sympathies to the health IT developers, I'm sure they're maintaining multiple versions at this point, and it will probably be a cycle where, insofar as the burden isn't high, we'll see a lot of server support, both with either a version plus or a version minus in terms of joint support. So you'll see a lot of servers that are going to be DSTU2 and FHIR Release 3 and maintain those over time, and then there may be a 3 and 4 support period as well. So I think that is also going to be a hybrid solution that we'll see from a number of developers that want to support their innovative third-party affiliates or business partners that may want to jump to the newest version of standard, yet they've got real deployed production systems out there that have been hardened for either Release 2 or Release 3.
Awesome. And another question, your own.
Please relate to Steve, besides, but thank you for the presentation. If he can comment on the My Healthy Data initiative and if that's raising the uptake of FHIR and based on patient access.
Okay, more compliments and thanks. And then can you comment on the My Healthy Data initiative? And is that doing anything to fuel demand for FHIR?
Sure. So the My Healthy Data initiative is really an umbrella term or phrase that's representative of the many interoperability and specifically consumer empowering activities that the executive branch of the United States is taking on. So that includes White House policy initiatives that the Office for American Innovation is taking on, that's led by Jared Kushner. That includes the VA's work around the activities that they have to enable veterans to get access to their data. It also includes, as was mentioned earlier, CMS-related priorities. So there's been a release of the Blue Button, a next version of Blue Button on FHIR for CMS beneficiary information. So this relates to the explanation of benefits and other kind of claims, administrative-related data that CMS has on patients. It includes all the work that my office is doing relative to the standards work, the consumer empowerment work. So that's really just to give you a sense that My Healthy Data is really kind of an initiative umbrella for many of the activities that we're doing in this space. And FHIR is obviously prominent, especially in the Blue Button version update for CMS.
Excellent, thank you. Any additional questions? No? All right, then, Steve, and to everyone else at the HHS studio there, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic presentation. Really appreciate you taking out your time out of your busy day to join us here at FHIR North. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much.